Welcome to the Too Busy to Eat show. I'm Greg Zuffalato, the host of the show, and also the founder of Too Busy to Eat, the protein bar company. Today, our guest is Simone Miller. Simone has a great history as a chef. She started very young, and she's been cooking for years and years. And she started in restaurants, went into being a personal chef, and then went into the catering business, had a lot of success having a gluten-free catering business. And then from there, she started developing recipes that led her to writing 3 different books: the Zen Belly Cookbook, the New Yiddish Kitchen, which she co-authored, and the Paleo Soups and Stews. Her website, zenbelly.com, is fantastic. There's tons of information, recipes, and then her journey is very interesting her journey to better health. So I'm excited. I want you to make sure you just get ready to get informed and enthused. But before the show, I want you to make sure you check out TooBusyToEat.com. Check out our protein bars. Use the coupon code TBTE show and get a 20% discount on your first order. And the bars they're gluten-free, which Simone will talk about. They're high in protein, very low in sugar. So check them out. Now it's time to listen to Simone. Welcome, Simone. I'm so excited to have you on the Too Busy to Eat show. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great. And I had the pleasure of reading about you, reading your story, the journey you've been on. So why don't you give everybody an update on your story to where, kind of the journey that took you to where you are today.
Okay. It feels like a long journey. It's been like 2 decades.
Because I know, yes. And it started young. I mean, your story started out when you were very young in your interest.
Yeah. And now I'm very old. So
no, you're not very old. It's all relative.
It's true. So yeah, I started cooking when I was about 19, when I was in college, at a little restaurant, a little sort of cafe in this sort of tiny little corner of Connecticut. And I always cooked in restaurants from then on, but I always was very adamant about the fact that it wasn't going to be my career. I always wanted to do something else.
Yes.
And I have a family in the restaurant industry, and I've just always heard all about how much work it is and how hard it is, and how, my uncle was always telling me, never go into the restaurant industry. So I always sort of had it in my head that I was sort of just doing this as a way to pay my way through college and have a job until I got my degree in whatever I was getting it in. And sort of just cooked in restaurants, but without really committing to it as my career, and did lots of things along the way while I was in college, and kept changing my mind about what I wanted to do. And I've always loved food, but I never wanted it to be my job.
Right.
And so I guess I would fast forward from there to a decade later, after working at a bunch of different places that ranged from vegetarian to, little French bistro to Mexican.
Right.
Once I moved to California, sort of randomly from the East Coast, spontaneously, I shouldn't say randomly, I got here and was sort of trying to figure out what to do here. And it felt very different. And once I was in the Bay Area, I started cooking for families. Even though I still didn't really want to be a chef, I was sort of doing the family assistant type gig. And most of that was cooking. And that sort of sparked something in me that made me realize that I wanted to cook for people, just not in a restaurant.
Right.
And it seemed a lot more possible doing that in the Bay Area as opposed to, say, upstate New York, where it's all tourism industry and not so much people hiring that type of staff. So that personal chefing sort of turned into catering. And once I decided to be a caterer, I realized that I couldn't eat everything anymore. And I was finding that my health problems had a lot to do with food. Shocker. And I realized that I couldn't really tolerate gluten.
Okay.
That was the main one. And that sort of felt like a big obstacle as far as catering went. So I decided to just make the catering company gluten-free.
Wow. Yeah. This was 10 years ago or more?
Yeah, I moved here 10 years ago, and then probably really started the catering company 2 years later. So 8 years ago. And that, I mean, it seemed to be like the best decision I could have made because it
Right.
was really necessary. It was sort of like at the beginning of gluten-free being really mainstream.
Yes.
And my focus was on really good quality, organic, local food and in season and just really tasty food that people like. So people didn't necessarily hire me only because of the gluten-free thing, but some people did because they wanted to make sure that they didn't get gluten at their wedding or something.
Right. Right. Right.
So that sort of has been the past 8 years. And in the past year or so, I've been sort of stepping away from catering. It's got a pretty quick burnout rate, at least for someone like me who gets a little antsy career wise.
Yes. Yes.
And I've been focusing more on recipe development and cookbooks and teaching people how to cook more than actually cooking for them.
That's
neat. Where I am now.
That's a great journey. I like that.
Yeah, it was like 2 decades, really compact.
Boom, quick.
Boom.
Well, I mean, I want to definitely get in and dive into your journey through the books you've written and the cookbooks you've put out. But I want to go back. Well, first, I have a personal question. What part of Connecticut did you start in? Because my whole family's from Connecticut.
Oh, wow. The first restaurant I started working in was in Willimantic in the northeast corner. Yeah. I grew up in Ridgefield for like middle school and high school, and then went to college out in the northeast corner of Connecticut. And that was my first restaurant gig. And then I moved to, I'm trying to think if I worked at any other restaurants in Connecticut. I think the rest were all in upstate New York.
In New York, okay.
In Ithaca, yeah.
That's a second home for us because that's where all the relatives are. So that's neat.
Yeah. We're in Connecticut for you.
So my brother now lives in Ellington, Connecticut. And then my parents grew up in a small town called Torrington, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And so my aunts live in Farmington. I mean, they're all over. They dominate Connecticut. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And now, going back to because health-wise, I know you had another piece of your experience was you were a vegetarian for a while. And
I was, yeah.
And that kind of had kind of negative health effect on you at some point. Kind of walk people through that a little bit.
Okay, so I felt, I think like sort of through my teens and early 20s, I always was, such an animal lover. I always felt a little like not great about eating animals.
Right.
So I never really went into vegetarianism for health reasons. So of course at the time it was like the healthiest thing you could do.
Yeah.
But I just didn't really feel good about it.
Yeah.
And then I got a job at a vegetarian cafe and felt like, well, I mean, if I can cook all this food in this little eatery, then obviously like I sort of felt like I didn't have an excuse anymore. So I became vegetarian and I felt really good about it. And I was, I think, eating pretty well, all things considered, but I was also eating a lot of things that I didn't know were terrible for me. So the person I was with at the time couldn't tolerate dairy at all. So all the dairy-free things we were eating were soy-based.
Okay.
And then I was eating a lot of like gluten, just like gluten sandwiches, like really serious like whole wheat bread on with like seitan. So it was just like gluten, and then having it with just constant soy and gluten.
That was primary part of your diet. Yes.
Yeah, it was way too much, and I was eating lots of vegetables too, but it was just too much. Mm-hmm. It was too much of all of that. So that just, really did a number on me, and I felt like mostly emotionally wise, it screwed me up. I felt like I was very, like I was the angry chef, and I felt like maybe I just had a temper, and I don't know, like that's just how it was. But I felt like I wasn't necessarily in control of my emotions, and I think it was just all the like soy, and just basically just assaulting my my whole hormonal system that way. And I, at the time, lived in upstate New York, and there was a really strong farmers market, sort of farm to table movement up there. And there was a lot of local farmers and ranches. And it was sort of like all of a sudden this really good quality meat was available that was raised properly and that was, taken care of as humanely as possible.
Right.
And that was sort of like, people used to joke that it was like the gateway meat. Like people who were vegetarians for ethical reasons were like, well, maybe I can, eat this beef if the cow had a happy life and was
Right.
slaughtered as humanely as possible. And that was sort of like how I started transitioning back into being a meat eater
Yeah.
and getting pastured chickens and, learning how to cook all that again.
Right.
And that made a huge difference. I just felt so much better all of a sudden and had no idea that that's what I was missing. But yeah, late 20s, I sort of dropped the vegetarian thing, and I was still eating wheat and soy because I didn't realize it was bad for me at the time. But the just introducing more animal foods into my diet made a big difference.
So you made that health jump there by adding the animal products back in, and then eventually to get to that next level of health, when you removed the gluten, you really figured that out. That was kind of 2 stages.
Yeah, it was sort of two. I feel like it was maybe 3 stages because I went from like the vegetarian to like the not vegetarian to removing the gluten, and then sort of realized that I felt so much better, but still like, not great.
Right.
And then I started hearing more about paleo and realized that I was eating a lot more carbs than I thought I was.
Right.
And I don't actually feel great when I'm keto necessarily. It's great for some people. I just don't feel like it's the best for me necessarily. But I feel like being lower carb is sort of my sweet spot.
Okay.
And I realized that once I cut out grains as like a major part of my life, it just brought the my blood sugar to such a more stable level where I wasn't crashing, and I could, skip breakfast and not feel like I was going to die, or go a few hours without eating. And like, I'd feel hungry maybe, but I wouldn't feel like I was going to like crash. And
right. And
it was a big difference.
And you stopped throwing pans and pots and pans in the kitchen.
I did. Stopped throwing pans. So that's super for everyone. And everyone's happier.
That's great. Yeah. But no, I have heard this similar story many times, and more people I talk to with the low carb thing is very popular, and that's how I've eaten for a number of years. But it's the understanding of getting the animal products, and it can be fish, it can be it can be a lot of different levels. I just try to encourage people, at least for humanitarian reasons. I understand. I mean, totally get it. Of wanting to stay away from a lot of the way meat's processed, but for health concerns, to get some type of animal product in where you're getting that animal fat and protein, it's so good hormonally and for your body. And I just like to share that. Not that people have their convictions, and I want to support that, but if you can figure a way around that, if it's humanely raised cattle or chickens or even fish is a way to get back into having some of the health benefits there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important for people to pay attention to their bodies and what works for them.
Yes.
And I think if you're just a complete, really convicted, like ethical vegetarian, and you just cannot bring yourself to eat meat, like I really can't argue with that. I feel like there's ways to buy the better stuff, but if that's absolutely the reason behind it and you feel okay and you're healthy, I really can't argue with that. But I think when people are vegetarians for health purposes and they actually don't feel that great, like maybe look at other options.
Right.
Just from personal experience.
Yeah.
I thought it was healthier.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for me.
Right.
So.
And that was your journey, and you were able to, because you knew your body and you pay attention, you were able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your books. You have the Zen Belly Cookbook. You have the New Yiddish Kitchen, and you also have Paleo Soups and Stews. Am I missing any? Or you have those 3 books so far?
Yep, those three, and that's it for now.
Yeah, for now. And that's part of what you taught. You kind of talked about moving away, going from from cooking in kitchens to more of a personal chef to catering, and now you're doing recipe development, and this is a great outflow of that. Tell us a little bit about that journey because putting together a cookbook, any book in general is very difficult. It's not an easy task. There's a lot of work involved. How did that come about, Zen Belly, to start?
I mean, I feel like it's always been sort of a bucket list thing and a dream that I've always wanted to write a cookbook, and it seems so unattainable, just because I would read about what it takes to write a cookbook, and it seemed so like such a tough thing to grasp.
Right.
But then being in this paleo community, it's such like a sort of tight knit, supportive, small community. Knowing people who know people, it sort of just fell into my lap almost. I was connected with Diane Sanfilippo, who, was sort of like the paleo queen at the time. She still is. I mean, like has so much good information out there. And she had written Practical Paleo. This was back, when that sort of, I think recently came out.
Okay.
And I was just sort of asking her questions. She was just sort of like an acquaintance that I could ask questions to. And she put me in touch with Victory Belt, which I wasn't expecting at all. I sort of thought I was going to have this really super long journey of writing proposals and, like pitching people. And they were such a great small publisher that focused on paleo. They were just so easy to work with and so supportive.
So
and
nice.
I sort of just got like that handed to me, which was like a dream come true. It's really just great to, Jesus. See, I have this problem with earbuds where like I cannot have them in my ears without knocking them out.
No, I can't wait. I want to get the little the buds that are wireless, but I haven't done that. I haven't taken that step yet. That's the next step.
I haven't done that either, but like they don't stay in my ears anyway, and then I knock them out. So
and then if you go walking or talking, yeah,
I can't. Anyway, sorry about that, but
no problem.
Yeah, so it's such a good supportive community that it seems like there's always someone who will, help you out and who you can work with, and like, I don't know, it's really nice. So that was sort of how it came to be. And then I was, connected with so many more people in the community, and that's how it started.
Well, that lowers that barrier when you have people supporting you and rooting for you and helping you along the way, because it's a large barrier to get started with a book. Anytime
it is, and
a cookbook,
definitely.
It's another layer because you're talking about the recipe development and all the things that go along with that. So that's exciting. Sure. And the other two books after the Zen Belly Cookbook, how did the other ones pop up?
Well, the New Yiddish Kitchen was the second one, and that one I wrote with Jennifer Robbins, so I co-authored that one. And she is the brains and the beauty behind Predominantly Paleo.
Okay.
And so she had her own thing going on, and her and I are in like a blogger sort of network group on Facebook. Okay. And that's how we met through there. And we just started this like ongoing instant message conversation about how there's every holiday that comes up, there's so many recipes, that's like what bloggers pretty much live for, are the holidays. Like that's when their recipes really get shared and put out there. And that's where we get to share new stuff. And we felt like there was this huge void with the Jewish holidays. And, Hanukkah was coming up, and we're like, there's all these, Thanksgiving and Christmas recipes everywhere.
Right.
And there's really not much for Hanukkah. Like there might be like the potato pancake here and there, but that's all that was really showing up. And we were sort of complaining about it. And then we realized that we were probably the ones, being two of the few like Jewish paleo bloggers in the world. We were probably the ones to make this happen. So it started off as a little mini ebook, I think of like 30 recipes. We were starting off as it being just like a Hanukkah ebook, because that was what was coming up. But then we kept thinking of all these recipes that we wanted to include that weren't necessarily Hanukkah recipes. They were Passover or Purim or just a year round, like something you'd make during the week recipe, but had those like Jewish cultural roots to it.
Right.
So it turned from a little Hanukkah book to an ebook that had about 50 recipes, focusing on the holidays and also just everyday ones. And then it did way better than we thought it would, probably because there was a really good bagel recipe in there, and paleo people love their breads that they can't have anymore.
Right.
So, that got picked up by her publisher that she had worked with her first book. And we turned it into a print book and doubled it in size and made it over 100 recipes.
Wow.
And that was a really fun one to do. And it has a lot of humor in it because we included these Bubby's tips on each recipe. And we were able to use little pictures of our own grandmothers, two of our grandmothers and two of our great grandmothers. And so they have this sort of like Yiddish snarky vibe to them. And some of them are just helpful tips and some of them are just sort of funny,
right, right.
um, like Jewish grandmothers can be. So yeah, that one is, I think that's like probably the most fun one that I've ever been able to do because
That's
it got to bring in so much like cultural stuff, but also modernize it all with the food part. So
yeah, we get it's more personal, more connected to your history.
yeah,
I mean, that's neat. That's
yeah,
a good project.
absolutely.
And then you came out in the paleo soups and stews that developed. Is that something that you just do a lot of, or you saw a need for?
Yeah, I mean, it started off being I sort of just wanted to do like a mini soup ebook
Yeah.
or something, or maybe a print book. I wasn't sure, and I was speaking with Victory about my first publisher about that one, and I had an idea for like a bunch of little books, sort of in a series. And when I mentioned the soup, they were like, "Oh, we really want to do soup. We really wanted to have a soup book." And I was like, "I don't know if I can do a whole soup book. That seems like a lot of soup." And then I just sort of sat down and wrote the table of contents and came up with like 60 recipes without really thinking about it too much and realized that like, okay, I probably could do a soup book. And that was sort of always all the restaurants I worked with, that was always sort of my thing. I was always like in charge of making the soup of the day. And in the first restaurant I worked with, I was working out of a recipe book because they were very into consistency and the soup being the same all the time. So I was just following a recipe. And then the second place I worked, it was way looser. It was just like a total hippie establishment. And they were like, you just make the soup. It just had to do with whatever was in the walk-in, which you never knew because the people ordering the food were not necessarily, the most professional restaurant people. They were just like kids working in this vegetarian restaurant.
Yeah.
So it was, you never knew what you were going to find. And so that's where I really learned how to improvise and how to make soup. And that's where I started to feel like I really had chops as a chef. Like before I was just following recipes and just going with what these restaurant owners had established. But at this place, I had to really improvise. And I realized once I figured out how to make a really good tomato soup, I could translate that into so many other soups. It was just like this sort of light bulb moment of, oh, I actually know how to do this. And I actually can like combine flavors and experiment with different foods and something really good will come of it. So that's where I started to feel like I really knew what I was doing. So soup has always been sort of like my foundation and where I feel like I really figured out how to be a chef, and I've applied those methods to other types of food. But that was sort of like the original place that I came from. So it was sort of like a near and dear to my heart type of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've made so many soups and I'm really good at making soup. And I felt like, okay, I might as well do a soup cookbook, and it was important to me to include all the stuff that goes with soup, like the breads, because I feel like what you're sort of missing.
Right.
If there's so many paleo soups, it's easy to make just about anything paleo. But then it's like you sort of want, at least I definitely want. I know other people do. Sort of want that thing to go with it. Just like I've never been a fan of just eating a giant bowl of soup without having like some sort of counter texture thing to go with it.
Yeah. Right.
So I did a lot of breads and croutons and things that are still paleo and maybe not low carb, but a good little treat to go with soup. And
right.
Yeah, I tried to make it nice and sort of varied, and of course included all the broths and all that too.
That's pretty neat because it's kind of full circle. As you started early on in your career, soups kind of launched you into this, and now, you're still got a lot of career ahead of you and a lot of things to do. But this is kind of coming back to that beginning and saying, hey, I can use those experiences from my early days and provide something pretty important for people. Because that is, I know a lot of people that soup is their go-to. It's a great way to feed the family. It's a great way to be able to make food, especially for busy people. You can make a big pot of soup and it can last you for days if you need it, which is really important.
Yeah.
Now, and all your, so for like Zen Belly and your Instagram and everything, like, what do you find people reaching out to you the most? Are they asking you more about the paleo or gluten-free, or just, what do you find interact most with?
I think a lot of what people are looking for me is foods that they miss from pre-gluten-free or pre-paleo days.
Right.
They want to include those in their lives, and they're not really sure how to hack that. Because that's sort of like my thing is like, I still want to eat chocolate cake. I still want really good cookies. I still want bagels. I still want the things that are like completely off the table unless you figure out how to make them with the new guidelines. So I have a lot of people like, I really miss this food. How do I make that paleo? Or once in a while, I'll ask people, you know, like, what do you want? Like, what do you miss? And what do you want me to recreate for you? And that's sort of what people, I think, look to me for. It's probably that and like just technique things. Like when I show people how to cut a pepper, that might be a different way than they're used to. They're like, oh my God, I'd never realized I could cut it that way. And that makes it so much easier. And it's all stuff that I learned along the way too, you know, until I saw Ming Tsai cut it that way on a cooking show. I had no idea, and I was doing it completely differently. And then it was sort of, you know, a mind-blowing experience for me 20 years ago. But now it's something
You're
I can
sharing your knowledge. Yes.
Yeah. So that's really what, like, that's like when people say that they feel like they are better cooks because they read my cookbook or followed a recipe. That's like the best. That's what makes it all worth it.
I mean, because you know, it's making an impact. What you're doing is impacting people's lives.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for people to get in the kitchen and cook and make real food for themselves, whether it's like the simplest thing they can make or like some kind of really complex, you know, all day cooking adventure. But I want people to feel more confident in the kitchen. And that's sort of what I'm constantly trying to help people do is just, if so many people just feel like they can't cook at all and that's such a block. And so, you know, when you're moving from like a processed foods diet to a real food diet, that can be a really big challenge because you know, people feel like they just can't do it. And I'm just here to say like, yeah, you can. You can. It's not that hard. Here are the basics. Here's how to do it. And that's.
Well, that's a great lead into this last question is if there's somebody out there that wants to become healthier, let's stay in that cooking realm. Let's say they're not healthy. Their lifestyle is busy. They don't think they can cook. They don't think they can eat healthy to become eat healthy to become healthier. What would you tell that busy person, or what advice would you give them to start on a journey to better health?
Well, I always tell people to not feel like it's all or nothing. Mm-hmm. So, because I feel like that can be really overwhelming when they start a new way of eating. They feel like, oh, well, I can't cook everything that I eat, so I just can't do this. And I feel like start small, and just start, you know, like if you eat 100% processed food and you cut that down to 50, like you're doing better. And so don't beat yourself up over, you know, don't let perfect get in the way of good type of thing.
Right.
Just start with like the basic things. I mean, if you know how to cook a few things, go with that, and then find a few recipes that are easy. I feel like, for an example, a lot of people feel like roasting a chicken is this like super complex thing until you do it. And then once people do it, it's like, oh, that was actually really easy. And it's harder to mess up than you think. And once you do that, it's like you roast a chicken and you've got like a good amount of food for a family or for a few days and lunches and snacks and things like that. And, you know, just learning how to make like a salad dressing and like make that instead of buying one and realize, oh, it's 3 ingredients. It's so easy. And then once you know how to make that, you can make like 8 more just with different oils. Vinegars, and just figuring out that like it's not all as complex, and like taking it slow and simple and like planning ahead as much as you can so you're not stuck feeling like you have nothing to eat. And just finding out what works for each person, I think, is really important, and not beating yourself up if you can't do it perfectly right away. Right.
And that is a great piece of advice I mean, you said, don't let perfect get in the way of good. That's a great saying. I mean, so don't try to do it all at once. Take baby steps. I mean, that's a great way to get started towards a better journey. And that's in everything. That's in cooking. It can be in changing your diet. It can be in exercise. You know, don't think it all has to happen overnight. Yeah, that's great.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough. This is fantastic. I'm excited because I'm a paleo fanatic myself. So I am going to get your cookbooks and I'm going to start making some soup. You got me. I'm hungry for soup now. So this is exciting. But I really appreciate it. I know you're busy. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the Too Busy to Eat show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It was really nice talking with you.
It was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.